normalize these conversations and make them not so scary. I do appreciate your respectful response to my different views. Have a good one, mate. So, because I think it is important to flesh all of this stuff out, because I think there's a lot of confusion and propaganda out there. But like, yeah, have a good one. I see you have me blocked. Kenneth, I haven't blocked you. So you might just have to get around the algorithm on that one. It does happen a lot. Other people have complained about that. If you're going to say something controversial or outside of this echo chamber, as you have described it, you're going to have to beat the algorithm on that one. Join the revolution, that's right. You tell him. I think he's just here for the lulz, not for the revolution, which is fine. We'll take all sorts as part of this motley crew, that's for sure. It's you who's saying the controversial things. It's only my comments being blocked. I'll try and soften it up for the algorithm. Let's see if that works. Sorry, it's me saying controversial things. That's right. And I think that's actually quite a good point. I'm saying controversial things, and why not, eh? A little bit of controversy goes a long way. I'm not totally against S-ism. I think that's socialism. I'm assuming that's maybe why you were censored. It's just this full on using other people's resources up becomes a problem. History shows us that millions of people have been killed due to that philosophy. All right, so using other people's resources up becomes a problem. I understand this sentiment. I think this is a big part of propaganda. There's this sentiment in the capitalist world and the free market world that everybody just works hard and they will be rewarded. So it's really based on a meritocracy. That is part of the American dream, let's call it the capitalist fantasy, that if you work hard, you will get somewhere. I know a lot of people that have worked hard and become successful. I know a lot of people that have worked hard and have absolutely nothing to show for it. And so this idea that if you work hard enough, then you will make it and you don't have to rely on anybody else and anyone else's resources is a pretext that I would say is just part of like the fantasy of living in a free market system. I base this on the idea that there is a taxation system and people do give out or give a share of their income or their wealth in tax. We pay taxes when we buy goods and services. We spend money, our own resources, to give back to the machine, society basically, to pay for other goods and services and to pay for other people to live in a comfortable existence and an existence that's kind of deemed worthy by society. And so all free market societies are based on this idea of taxation. So taking a portion of some people's income and wealth to redistribute that to the system and allow there to be government services, people picking up rubbish and servicing public roads and public infrastructure, down to making sure people are protected through the police and protected from external threats through the military. So while I understand that there is obviously a concern when it comes to communism about everybody just wants free stuff kind of thing and they just want to take your shit, that sort of redistribution of wealth and resources happens already. And it happens already under capitalism. It's actually inbuilt in the capitalist system. You need to have a state in order to protect capital. And so capitalists will get together, the wealthy, the rich will get together, and they will pay the state to protect their interests and to make sure that roads are built, the workforces are educated and all that sort of stuff. So they have workers and they have ways for their workers to get about their daily lives and then can make profit for them and can feed the entire system. So society generally works at a certain level of resource distribution. And so I guess the argument that you might have, Kenneth, or the problem you might have, the concern you might have is with regards to at what point do you set the limit on the redistribution of wealth. Now, if you're talking about the millions of people that have been killed by communism, I can really only attribute that to poor decision making by people that have been in power, people that are absolute rulers. And people that are absolute rulers make poor decisions all the time. It's riddled throughout history, and it happens within capitalist countries and within communist countries. Millions of deaths have been made by poor decisions of leaders all of the time. I don't think you can really bring that down to communism. You will have had parties in power at certain times where hundreds of millions of people have died, supposedly, really out on that one. But let's just say it's in the tens of millions. That's still a lot of people, and it's hard to ever justify anything like that. But to say that is the idea of communism that kills millions of people, I think is wrong. It's not the idea of communism. Again, it's people that have been in power and been making decisions that have affected the lives of millions and millions of people that have made this type of thing happen. So like that's what certain commentators out there like to say about what communism has done, is killed hundreds of millions of people or something like that. It's really hard to refute and argue against that type of logic when you know that the stats are kind of out. Like in the case of the Russians, the Soviets who were at war with the Nazis, they attribute all the Nazis that they killed at wartime to the deaths of communism. And if you went around the world and started attributing all the deaths of people's enemies that they were at war with to a certain population, it'd start to run up with some pretty ridiculous numbers. And so like the real question is then, if you want to just look at whether a system is good or not by whether it's killed a lot of people, then you have to ask yourself, what's the death toll of capitalism? And I don't know if you could have a really good understanding of the amount of people that the capitalist mode of production has killed, because it's not as blatantly obvious as Mao making a decision to collectivize farming and then half of the population feel the effects of a famine. When it comes to capitalist decisions, it's like the IMF or a certain company deciding to cut off the funding to a certain drug program and a relief program in a certain part of the developing world because they don't want to pay for it anymore, and it wipes out tens of thousands of children that were going to benefit from a drug or something like that. And that sort of stuff doesn't go counted, but you could say that is a monstrous part of the capitalist mode of production, that business decisions are made on a daily basis which basically wipe out thousands and thousands of people. And there's a decision at the moment under Trump's new policies that he's been signing executive orders for, and they're going to cut off providing AIDS drugs to African nations to stop the deaths as a result of AIDS. And the predictions that are coming out from cutting off this type of funding are going to end in the deaths of 6 million people over the next 10 years. And so how many times has a policy decision based on money under capitalism resulted in the deaths of millions of people? I don't want this to turn into a measuring contest about who kills more people, but you can't just measure an idea on a metric like that, because once you go down that rabbit hole, I think you will be surprised, Ken Oath, what's the relative death toll under capitalism compared to people that have called themselves communist is. I think you would actually be rather surprised about what that is. And it's rather scary to think about. When the English decided to, basically kick the Irish off their land, and take any food that they had produced for themselves during the potato famine, and millions of Irish people died as a result of that, because they wanted to make sure that they were still able to export potatoes as part of their industry and part of their capitalistic interests, and as part of a ploy just really to wipe out the Irish, let's be honest. How many times has that happened over the world under a capitalistic market system? So I don't think you can attribute to the idea of communism, which is really about creating a society at the end of the day, where people aren't feeling economic pressure anymore. There's no class systems. There's no idea of private property being things that add to societal wealth. So the means of production, things that produce wealth, not your toothbrush or your house or something like that. And so creating a society where you can move away from classes and people owning the things that we all live off and we all need to survive is not that scary as a concept. But like I said, if people have used that concept to justify some terrible things, and basically absolute control over entire populations because they had a vision and they were going to undertake that vision regardless of the impact on human life, then there's not much you can do. History is riddled by leaders who thought they had the divine right of kings, or like the divine justice served by God, and have enacted horrible and unspeakable things on fellow humans. It is simply a part, and this is an anarchist take on this one, that is simply the part of having a society where you have a state element at the disposal of a ruling class. And a state element is fundamentally, yes, it's a bureaucratic machine which helps administer society, but really, from an anarchist perspective, it is a force in society that has a monopoly over the use of violence. So it has the ability to use a military, it has an ability to have a police force, and like it's the only legitimate form of violence within that society. And so like if you put a maniac at the head of a state institution that has a military and has a police force and all that sort of stuff and has the legitimate use of violence, then it can go out and forcefully do things to people and end in the results, and it can result in the deaths of, ridiculous amounts of people. And so like the real question I think you should be asking, Kenneth, is whether or not having a state is a necessary part of society anymore. And that would cover your question about resource distribution as well, because resource distribution, if you're worried about it, all comes from the state. And so like maybe you're an anarchist, Kenneth. Maybe you don't like the state. That's your real problem. It's not communism, it's not capitalism, it's the fact that there is a state apparatus out there. I did answer the question put to me here, but they don't come up. So I'm going to click off now. Enjoy your echo chamber. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day. So obviously the algorithm doesn't like you. Been happening to me too. I don't think Ken's interested in whether it happens to other people. It's more his individual experience that needs to be noted. It's YouTube's auto censor. We seem to be getting censored a lot these days, can I just say? Something's going on. Someone's been flagged. But like, yeah, I think it's a good discussion to have nonetheless, because, there's always some big question marks about revolution and about, this idea of communism and, taking my stuff, robbing Peter to pay Paul, all of these cliches. It's good to be able to actually talk about them, because like they're going to come up, and us as revolutionaries are going to have to be able to speak to these things and speak to them very articulately and deal with the pressure of being asked those things in order to normalize these conversations and make them not so scary. I do appreciate your respectful response to my different views, but not allowed to discuss my views here. No point in me trying to contribute. Have a good one, mate. Oh, okay. Well, look, yeah, I don't know what to say to you. Like, I do apologize, but I really have no control over the algorithm. So to listen, because I think it is important to flesh all of this stuff out, because I think there's a lot of confusion and propaganda out there. But like, yeah, have a good one and have a good day. And it's not only happening to you, apparently. At least he feels kind of validated a little bit. Like, it's so much better than like the usual leftist bullshit that I see, where like someone speaks up against like contradicts the left on something, and like all these leftists, I hate this, jump out and they're just like, oh, he's a fascist, they're fascist, like kind of thing. It's just like, did you even listen to what they fucking said, or did you just start calling them a fucking fascist? I always found it difficult to find places to discuss these ideas before I found these streams interesting. Well, I'm glad, because that's the fucking point of them. I'm really glad to hear you say that. And like, that's why I like to entertain like people like Kenneth and stuff like that. Like, I've had a lot of discussions online with people that are like, obviously hate communism, and they're just like, communism, people dead. And I'm just like, okay, well, fine, and let's have a chat. And then we have a chat to people, and then they're just like, oh, well, like, thanks for explaining to me. I don't agree with you at all, but at least you took the time to like have a listen. I'm still here. I decided to stay and just listen. And like, well, like, yeah, I think, well, there you go. I'm glad you stayed around and listened. And like, this is the modern version of a reading group then. And like, we introduce, like, have people in that have different ideas. Like, that is supposed to be the point of like, freedom of speech, right? Is like, if you really like your ideas, okay, then you got to be able to fucking test them in the public domain. Because if someone challenges your ideas and you're just like, fuck, I didn't think about that before, that's a good thing. That's a really good thing, because then you have to go back and self-reflect. And that's what Mao was all about. His biggest thing was self-reflection and self-criticism. And like that got a bit extreme sometimes, because like, you know, when like they went out and they had their meetings, sometimes they were just like self-reflect, and like that all point at someone like a property owner or something like that. And like if that person didn't like reflect on themselves in the right way, like this is all the peasants, right, that have just been exploited by this like property owner for a long time, and like if that person didn't reflect in the right way, they probably like stone them to death or something like that, or they just, you know, they gave them a massively hard time. And so there was a lot of that, and there was also a lot of women's liberation around this as well, because like women were subservient to men in the Confucian social structure. And so like when the communists were going around, like, you know, having these reading groups and encouraging the people to kind of, you know, let go of their peasantry existence, there was a lot of like, this man has been oppressing me for a long time. And like, you know, wives and like oppressed women yelling at like men and asking them to self-criticize and self-reflect. But like, you know, this was the vehicle, and this is how they convinced a lot of people. And like, let's be honest, like if you had been living as a peasant and you didn't have any hope for anything, but you felt like you had been trodden on for a long time, anyone that came along and said, I'll give you a plot of land, it doesn't matter if you're a communist, you're a Republican, or you're a fascist or something like that, if they just said, hey, I'll give you some land, they probably would have followed them along too. So like if you're looking for like, I don't know, a silver bullet that like may help them see the light of communism or something, it was just the fact that they were appealing to that class, a class of people that had been forgotten by history, I think. I'm not gonna lie, it's almost like the new left brought more reactionary takes of what it meant to be a leftist. That's what I'm really worried about when it comes to the new left. And so I have been fighting with this like this so-called leftist for a while now over like this idea of wokeism and stuff like that. And I just said, look, let it go. Like if the right wing want to describe wokeism as this bad thing and that bad thing, and a majority of the working class are convinced by that type of argument that wokeism is a problem. And like, I don't think being woke is a problem in terms of like, you know, being enlightened, not discriminating against people, and just not being a douchebag. Like if that's what wokeism is, fine. But like it's taken on a life of its own, and it's like a dog whistle for right-wing people to say something and like piss off large sections of the working class. And I've basically been like, you know, let's forget about all of this additional stuff, this stuff that is now described as wokeism and a plague on society, because it is basically co-opting and corrupting the working class. It's separating the left from the working class, especially the revolutionary left, like people like us. And like, you know, if we don't have an anchor to the working class, what the fuck do we have at the end of the day? And so like, yes, that's the point of like streams like this, is to like kind of defuse a lot of the negative views about communism, which is just tied to like, you know, Western propaganda, really, like leftovers from the Cold War, and like reach out to people on their level, on like a working class level. And like, that's what, like, if you want to learn from a lesson from a revolutionary, and he was Chiang Kai-shek, he was a revolutionary. He wanted to revolutionize imperial China and like bring about a republican revolution, a bourgeois revolution. And he failed because he didn't give a fuck about the people. And I think that's a really good lesson. Like really, like a majority of your population, if you're not taking their sentiments on board, then, you know, forget about it. Like, do you really care about what you're doing, or are you just like showboating or virtue signaling?
Remember, I am, you are, we are a mystery.
I am on Patreon. Please follow the link in the description and sign up for free. We are trying to build a revolutionary community over there. So go become a member for free and join the conversation. If you can contribute financially, that would help a lot.